Good morning. I guess we're good into good afternoon. I am Samuel Orr. I am a nature documentary filmmaker, but I probably am most often referred to as the bug guy, or the guy who makes bug movies. We'll get onto that in just a second, because my second claim to fame is with my time-lapse photography, which also plays a part in the nature filmmaking. But we had a little introduction to time-lapse earlier in the day with the presentation of the North Korean time-lapse. And what I explain to people who don't really fully understand what it means to make time-lapse or be a time-lapse photographer, in addition to everything else that you would need to do as a photographer or a filmmaker, when you're making time-lapse, you need to consider what is going to move in my time-lapse movie and how fast is it going to move. Because the time-lapse is made of a series of still photographs. Real-time video that you see from a camera, in this country at least, is 30 frames a second. So if you want people walking through a landscape to move twice as fast, you take 15 pictures per second and you play them at 30 pictures per second in the video, and they move twice as fast. It gets complicated if you have, in a single frame, if you have things moving at various speeds. So clouds are going to move more slowly than people, but you have to take that into account. What exactly is the focus of the movie that you ideally want to make? Just to introduce this little concept, we're going to watch a little 2-minute film, and while you're watching it, I want you to think about it. Overall seems to be playing at about the same speed. This is a landscape that we're going to look at. It's a natural scene, but things are happening in real time at much different speeds. Snow falling happens much more fast than a sun moving across the horizon. So these are sort of decisions that have to be made by the time-lapse filmmaker. And usually the first time is as an experiment if you haven't worked with something specifically, and usually is a failure, but you learn for it. I expected this film to be the same thing, to be an experiment. It would be an interesting failure. I would learn from it. I was living in the middle of basically a nature preserve in a small house, and I put a camera in a window for 16 months. And took, in the end, about 50,000 pictures and edited them down to what you're going to see is about 2,600 pictures. But we'll look at that. It's at the forest year time lapse, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the insects. So looking at it, it's interesting. It's a bit counterintuitive. If you look at what you've just seen here, it doesn't seem like things are moving very quickly. Obviously, the trees aren't moving. You know, branches might blow. Clouds are moving a bit. But compared to the time lapse we saw earlier today of an urban setting of people moving, time is passing hundreds of times more quickly in this short piece than in the other one. And it's all comes down to what exactly are you trying to show with your time lapse. And my background is I got sidetracked about 12 years ago from a career path of getting a PhD in biology, ecology, and I got sidetracked into making nature documentary work. And for the film project that I'm going to finish with, I was wanting to show time passing because the subject lives for a very long period of time underground, and I thought, I'll put a camera in the window, I'll see, you know, how this works. And it turns out that this kind of took on its own life and won't be in the film. But another reason is because this was just a throwaway camera. This was filmed in 2006, 2007, and even then, the camera that I used was laughably obsolete. I had to use my primary cameras for my primary filmmaking, and this was just, anyway, an experiment. I look at it now and I sort of grimace that the quality of the photography of the camera wasn't where it should be. I wish I could do it again, but that was a big investment, and I don't live in the woods anymore, so it's kind of hard to know when things are going to happen. You know, you wake up in the morning, it's like, oh my God, beautiful fog. You can't really schedule that if you don't live in the woods. Anyway, getting to the main reason I'm here is the project that I've been working on for far too long on the cicadas. The cicadas are a common type of insect in honor of Christmas. I actually heard a cicada yesterday near a mangrove forest over somewhere on the bay, so they're here. There are over 3,000 described species of cicadas worldwide, and there easily could be twice that many if there were more cicada researchers, which there aren't very many. There's not a lot of money in doing cicada research, unfortunately. But anyway, they're found most areas of the world outside of the polar regions. Any place that you've got forests, grasslands, shrubs, you're probably going to have cicadas. You can find them in deserts, in forests, in grasslands, even near the top of mountains in places like New Zealand where they're singing next to a snowfield or a glacier, which is very strange if you're only used to North American cicadas. But I specifically am doing film on the periodical cicadas, more commonly known as the 17-year cicadas. And that's because unlike every other known species of cicadas in the world, with the exception of one or two, which there's some bickering amongst the experts, but we'll leave them to bicker, you know, in the alley, they're the only cicada group of species that are on a synchronized periodical lifespan, which means that they only appear every 17 years. The other 16 years, you'll see no sign of them. There might be one or two stragglers whose internal clocks are a little confused and they come out too early or too late. But 99.99% of them come out only every 17 years. Every other type of cicada in the world is seen much more often, usually every year in a given location. They live for usually multiple years underground, but they have different generations that are coming out in different cycles. The North American periodical cicadas, virtually everybody in a population will come out once every 17 years. So why am I doing this? I initially ended up working in a biologist lab who was doing a little research on cicadas back in 2002, 2004, and that segued to me into working on a film on them because I had a little filmmaking background, and I used to describe myself as an ecologist with a background in filmmaking. Then that transitioned into a filmmaker with a background in ecology, and now it's just I'm the bug guy. So I'm not, not a filmmaker, not an ecologist, primarily filmmaker. But, how is this possible? I've been filming cicadas off and on, not continually, but when they're available to me, shockingly enough, for about 11 years. And that's when I have talked to colleagues about this who make films and such and explain to them, it's been 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. They sort of shake their heads and are like, no, you're doing it wrong. It doesn't take that long to do these things. And I'm like, well, maybe not ideally. A couple of things that make this possible for me, whether you've decided, this is nutty extreme behavior or not, to be filming them for 11 years, your first question might be, well, if it's 17 years, how have you been working on them for 11 years? Because presumably you've seen them once. Well, it doesn't quite work that way. It's a little easier if you're a little extreme. The first thing that makes this possible is that I'm sure there's an undiagnosed obsessive compulsive disorder involved. Almost certainly. But we'll keep it undiagnosed just for insurance purposes. The second reason is that even though they come out every 17 years, they tend to, in the southern part of the United States, they come out every 13 years because it's warmer and they grow faster underground because the growing season's longer. But they're the same, in essence, the same species. There are 15 different populations of the 17-year cicadas on different regional schedules. So in practice, how that works is in the eastern half of the U.S., 2 out of every 3 years, somewhere, there are these insects coming out of the ground. So, woohoo. That, my OCD is in love with this because, hey, you didn't get everything I wanted 1 year? Well, just do it next year. And this is also, with the exception of some crowdfunding, this has been pretty much a personal project that I do as I have time and resources. What you're going to see here at the end of the talk is a little sort of 6-minute promotional film put out a couple of years ago. In the end, the film ideally is going to be an hour, maybe a bit longer. And, that takes time, that takes resources, that hopefully this doesn't take 17 years. It's been 11, but, it'll be done at some point. But the interesting thing about the film you're going to see is, as far as structurally, you're going to see segments, pieces of it. Some of it was filmed 2008, 2009, 2011, 13, 14, and 15. And there's some time lapse in there as well. But that's not apparent while you're watching it. That's not part of the narrative. That doesn't really matter. But behind the scenes, it's sort of like you'll just shake your head and just wonder, that's a lot of work over a number of years, and this is only 7 minutes. Does that mean you have to work 50 years to get up to 50 minutes? But the other thing that inspired this, and I think really gets back to keeping nature contacts with children, is a memory of when I was 6 years old. To enjoy the natural world, I probably grew up in amongst the worst places in the world, northern Indiana. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's pretty much all corn and soybean fields. Originally, 200 years ago, it was all forested, but now it's just agricultural. They call it the till plain. I grew up in a suburban home. We had a suburban backyard, grass, a few large trees. And I can remember, one of the highlights of the summer was when cicadas shells would start appearing on tree trunks. For those of you who aren't familiar with cicadas, they live underground feeding off of tree roots like aphids feeding off of plants. And you only see them, their juvenile period can be years, 17 years in the case in the film here. And when they come out of the ground, they become adults, and they only live for 2 weeks. And they come out, at least in North America, pretty much at dusk and at night. So if you're not out at dusk, you don't notice them. I never saw them when I was a small child. I just saw the empty shells and was intrigued, where did this come from? None of the adults in my life seemed to know, or I don't remember them telling me about it. So I'm mystified and amazed by this. That happened every year like clockwork in July and August. But then what was more interesting to me was, where did they go? What happened to these things that are clearly, there would be 50 or 100 shells. These were different kinds of cicadas in my backyard that came out every year in much smaller numbers, and they disappeared up into the trees. You didn't see them, not like you're going to see in the film, where if you're fortunate or unfortunate enough to have them in your backyard, you won't miss them. if you in turn have some sort of obsessive compulsive cleaning disorder, you might be advised to leave town for a while, because it can be very messy. They can be in numbers up to $1 million per acre. But anyway, I will go into the film here, and before we go into lunch, but I hope that you get a small part of what I'm trying to communicate with the cicadas. Insects are animals, which a lot of people don't think about, and insects are usually trying to bite us or sting us or eat our house or our tomato plants. So there's not a lot of empathy for insects. But I want you to think about an insect that if you have children that aren't adults yet, these bugs are older than your children, and they've been waiting for this big moment that only is going to last 2 weeks in their lives. So enjoy the film, and I hope you enjoy the cicadas as much as I obviously do. And we're going to show the cicada film. Thank you.